Empire. Can the Cleveland Browns live up to the hype? That's the question that we're talking about today on the Football Jones podcast. This is Mike Jones. You can read me at usatoday.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @ByMikeJones. And yes, the Browns are the topic of discussion because we are 2 weeks away from the start of training camps, and I feel like they are going to be a team that we're really going to keep our eyes on because, there's a lot of intrigue there. They had some promise coming into last season, started off with some struggles, really finished strong down the stretch, and now they've got continuity on their side, and a lot of people are talking about them, and I want to find out, okay, is this substance or is it just flash? And so I wanted to have Nate Ulrich of the Akron Beacon Journal on. He covers that team, knows them inside and out, and so he's our guest today on the podcast. We're going to take a deep dive into the Browns, into Baker Mayfield, into his future with the team, into their prospects for this coming season. We're getting to it right now. All right. Hey, Nate, thanks so much for joining me here. How's everything this last little bit of, not quite freedom, but a little bit of a slower pace before training camp gets going here?
Going well, man. Thanks for having me. Got a little bit of time with the family, and yeah, it's kind of the calm before the storm. As we know, it's about to pick up big time.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to have you on because I feel like the Browns are a really intriguing team. They've got a lot of expectations. It's going to be interesting to see if they can live up to them. But how are you feeling about this squad? Obviously, last year was a big year for them. Making to the playoffs, getting their first playoff win since '94, and then now they're hoping to build on that. But what did you think of last year and kind of where they are right now?
Well, last year was obviously refreshing after covering this team for more than a decade. This is going to be my 12th season. It had been nothing but losing, and you don't want to cover the same story over and over again, obviously, as a journalist. Last year was a great change of pace. They turned it around under Kevin Stefanski. They had the talent in 2019, and everybody could see it on paper. It did not translate under Freddie Kitchens. He ended up being a one-and-done coach, and then Kevin Stefanski was able to bring these guys together and really do it in unprecedented circumstances with the pandemic and, teaching his schemes over Zoom, building camaraderie with team building exercises over Zoom. So it really was kind of a remarkable season considering what they were dealing with. Even though they had the talent to do that under a first-year coach is really impressive. And what I'm feeling about them now is that they're a legitimate contender. I really think so, because that offense that really, took some significant strides last year with Baker Mayfield getting comfortable in the Kevin Stefanski, Alex Van Pelt system, that offense is coming back. It's intact. The coaching staff is coming back. It's intact. And the defense, which was the biggest question mark, obviously, last year, has been virtually totally revamped by GM Andrew Berry this offseason, adding a lot of really talented pieces. Of course, they've got to gel. They've got to come together, get on the same page, and develop that chemistry and communication that you need to compete with some of the teams in the AFC and the quarterbacks in the AFC that the Browns are going to have to get past if they want to, achieve their ultimate goal. Obviously, we know Lamar Jackson's right there in the division, and Patrick Mahomes knocked him out of the playoffs last year. But I think they stand a way better chance with the defense, after the upgrades that have been made. So, I think that the rare continuity in the coaching staff and on the offense and with the upgrades on defense, you can expect the Browns to be right there in the mix. I think a AFC championship game appearance is a realistic expectation. I don't think it's, anybody getting too carried away.
Gotcha. Now, that continuity, I think, is something that, it's almost remarkable the way Baker Mayfield finished the season last year because of the fact, like, people kind of knock on him some, but he had one head coach, then he had a new offense, then another one. And so to fight through all that stuff and then finish the year on a strong note, how much more freely do you think he'll be able to play right now, being the fact that he doesn't have to learn a new language, doesn't have to learn a new system and new way of doing things? He'll be able to actually expand what they're asked of him.
I think we're going to see the best of him. I really do. He had that great rookie season, and then he regressed big time in 2019. He just, I think 2019, it was weird because he wasn't in shape. I think he really was just thinking that, hey, I went in and I broke the rookie touchdown passing record. And I'm the real deal. I'm going to be, the man in the NFL. And the NFL has a way of humbling guys, and it certainly did with Baker, because I just don't think that work ethic he's known for was quite at the level that, he's had it throughout his life, coming off that season. And he just wasn't himself. And, he was not in the tip-top shape. And then that affected his movement. He had some injuries, some nagging injuries that affected his workout regimen too, that exacerbated the condition he was in. And then the team, it just, they weren't organized or disciplined under Freddie Kitchens. The offense wasn't. And Baker obviously, regressed as a result of all those things. And then last year, he got in great shape. He found a trainer in Austin, Texas, his hometown, amid the pandemic. And he came in looking like a different guy, dropped a lot of weight, and got his movement skills back that he was known for. And that's so important. And he and Kevin Stefanski talked about it, not just in general, but specifically in this scheme where you're doing a lot of the rollouts and the bootlegs on the play action. And he really excelled in it. The beginning of the season, they were trying to find their way. They were trying to find their identity because, hey, they didn't have any preseason games under this new coaching staff. They didn't have any spring practices, but it clicked. And, if you look, they went 12-6. They played 18 total games, including the 2 playoff games. Mm-hmm. And if you look at his splits after that Cincinnati game in week 7, I think it was week 6, it was the 6th game. Then the rest of the season, he threw 20 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So he finished incredibly strong. I mean, you're talking about the last 11 plus games of the season, he was playing at a Pro Bowl level. And I think the fact that, as you mentioned or alluded to, Mike, he had 3 playbooks and 3 head coaches in his first 3 NFL seasons. First time he's getting to run it back with the same guy with the same playbook. So I do think we're going to see the best of him. I think he's in great shape again, looked great at mandatory mini camp. And obviously he's surrounded by, an incredible amount of weapons is getting Odell Beckham Jr. back.
Now, do you feel like, well, I'll ask you this next one first then, since you mentioned Odell. Odell goes down and it seems like the offense starts clicking. Was he trying to force it to Odell too much? And if so, how does he avoid that this year now that Odell is back in the mix?
And I think it's the number one question facing the offense because, you don't have a big shakeup. You've got the continuity. I mean, everybody is back except for the most notable guy who left was a backup swing tackle, Kendall Lamb. The 7th offensive lineman, essentially 7th or 8th offensive lineman. I mean, everybody's back. So there aren't really huge questions except for Odell suffering that torn ACL on October 25th in that game against the Bengals I mentioned earlier. So you get him back. He looks phenomenal right now. I mean, in mandatory minicamp, if you look out there and you didn't know he had a torn ACL in October, you wouldn't know. I mean, he's running, he's cutting, he looks really great. And, the question that remains is, can Odell and Baker find that chemistry that they just haven't been able to get consistently since the Browns traded for Odell a couple of years ago? And the Browns haven't had a healthy Odell yet for a season. They had him in 2019, that dysfunctional year. He was hurt the whole year. He was hurt in training camp. He was dealing with a core muscle injury, and he pushed through it. He played all 16 games, and he had surgery after the season. And then last year, obviously, plays the 6 games, had a great game against the Dallas Cowboys, 3 touchdowns, really lifted them to that victory. And they needed every single win at the end of the regular season to make the playoffs. They had a win and in situation at the end. So they really needed that performance out of Odell. They got it, and then the torn ACL. So it's like the chicken and the egg question. Would Baker have started to excel and finish with that great touchdown to interception ratio if Odell had stayed healthy? No one knows. The Browns will tell you that Baker just got comfortable with the system and everything that was going on. And they had a crucial bye week there in the middle of the season where Stefanski and offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt and Baker got to pow out and really play catch up from a lot of the things that they think they missed in training camp. And they really say that bye week was monumental because they were able to really adjust the playbook and what they were doing. And they came out on fire after that as an offense for the most part. They did have like 3 really weird weather games in Cleveland, which it's pretty funny because that 20 touchdowns and 2 interceptions includes the weird weather games. He could have lit it up more than that theoretically. But yeah, with Odell, the Browns will tell you that, hey, Baker just got more comfortable, grew in the system, and he would have been really excellent even if Odell had still been there. Then there is the question of, does Baker feel pressure to appease Odell? Because Odell wants the ball. He's vocal about it. He believes in his talent, pretty much above anything, and believes that if he has the ball, he's going to be able to help the team win. So I do think that Baker at times would press and try to force it to him. And I think that's a confidence thing. I think when Baker comes back with the same coaching staff, the same system, the way he finished last year, I think he's a more confident guy this year. He admitted last year that he had self-doubt creep in. I don't see that this year. And I think that confidence is going to allow him to, to basically operate within the flow of the offense and not dwell on, I have to get it to 13.
Now, what about the contract status? He wants to be here. They want him here. They don't have to get something done right now, but, this is normally the time where you sign a guy to an extension to avoid, the 5th-year option or having to use the franchise tag after that. Is that going to be a distraction to him? Or is he going to feel pressure to really, say they don't get something done before the start of the season? Do you see him as being a guy who feels like, oh, okay, I've really got to prove it since, we didn't get something done. They have questions about me. I've got to make something happen, and then wind up hurting himself, not physically, but production wise?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike, because, I don't think it's a question of whether they do an extension. It's just a question of the timing. And Jimmy actually essentially said that, he was like, we're delighted with Baker and everything that he's done and how he's grown on and off the field. And, it's basically the timing of a contract extension is going to be up to Andrew Berry. So it really does sound like, when, not if. Mm-hmm. But here's the weird thing. I've asked Baker, he's got 2 classmates, right, that we're all looking at from that 2018 draft class in the quarterback group, and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And if they get extended first and he's kind of like the odd man out or whatever, the guy left waiting, how is he going to handle that? He says he'll be happy for him. He said all the right things so far. I think it'll be interesting to see if that does play out, how he reacts, because I do think it's easy to say that, he's going to handle it well. But if you're the last guy, you might have some feelings about that. I will say that the line about him being at his best when he's motivated and proving himself, I believe it. I think that I've seen enough of it here. And obviously that was his whole story in college as a 2-time walk-on and a guy who ascended to Heisman Trophy winner at Oklahoma. But I really do believe the chip on the shoulder Baker is the best, version of Baker. And so if he is if he feels that he's in some kind of prove it situation, if a deal doesn't get done, I don't think he's going to like crumble or fold or cave. I think that if anything, his history shows that is a scenario that could put him in his best possible mode. So I think he's going to be okay through this. And I think that the comfort too, when I talk about this and how it's not going to be a disaster, because there have been a lot of disasters in Cleveland and I've seen some contractual ones. I don't think it's going to be that case here because ultimately both sides feel good about each other and they do want to get it done.
And I don't think it's a bad thing if he slow plays this thing. I mean, I could be wrong, but I almost feel like, hey, like slow play it because your salary is going to jump with that 5th-year option. Your salary is going to jump again with the franchise tag. I mean, Kirk Cousins made a lot of money by playing year to year. Dak Prescott set himself up nicely. If I'm Baker, I'm kind of like, sure. I mean, since he believes in himself, he's a confident guy like that. I don't think it's a bad thing if he goes into this season or next offseason without that extension because the money's just going to keep growing as the revenue continues to skyrocket with these TV deals and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the big picture of the league like you are, I totally get the point. I think it's going to happen sooner than later, and I don't know if it's going to happen before this season, but I think that the sense that I get from talking to people familiar with the whole situation is that, talks are probably going to be picking up and becoming meaningful around training camp as we get into August here. And then it could extend into the season, early into the season. That's kind of the latest feel I get from the people involved. And, I don't think that's a bad thing, like I said earlier. And to your point about him waiting, yeah, I see your point about the big picture of the league, but I keep going back to when I say sooner rather than later, I just keep going back to Andrew Berry and how he's operated so far. And that is trying to get ahead of the market.
Right.
So I think he is, and going to get things done sooner than later, usually. Now, of course, it's always case by case. But last year, I look at what he did with Myles Garrett. And it was interesting. Like now at the time, like if you think about the season Myles Garrett had, and he was right there in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year, and then he got COVID. And down the stretch, he just was not the same guy. Missed 2 games, and then his conditioning, his wind wasn't there. But having said that, I think anybody who follows the NFL right now would say, oh, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Of course the Browns extended him last summer. Mm-hmm. You got to go back to last summer and remember the circumstances. Myles was coming off a 6-game suspension after he hit Mason Rudolph in the head with a helmet.
Right.
That was like a traumatic event. I mean, it really was. There was the racial component. There was just, being vilified. I mean, he was one of the most controversial figures in all of sports.
Yeah.
After that incident. And the Browns extended him anyway before he had ever played another snap, with total confidence that he would still be the guy that, he's talented enough to be and reach his potential and all that. And basically Andrew Berry's point was, I just want to get ahead of the market. And like 10 days later, I think it was about 10 days, a week and a half, 2 weeks, Joey Bosa is extended and then breaks the record that Myles had just set for the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. So there's an example of Berry getting ahead of the market. And I think that that's going to be his MO more times than not.
Gotcha. Now, you talked about this defense here being overhauled. What can we expect? And do they have the playmakers to be able to contain a Lamar Jackson, to slow down a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen? Because those are the 3 guys really that I feel like that they most have to worry about.
I'm totally with you, Mike. And that was a big question after the offseason because you looked at the AFC playoffs and who was left. It was the Browns, it was Baker, and it was those guys you just mentioned. So obviously you want to win your division. The Browns haven't done that since 1989. They had a great season last year, 11-5, 1-1 in the playoffs, so 12-6 total. But the stat that not enough people talk about is 0-2 against the Ravens. And obviously Lamar's a huge problem for everyone. But the Browns, they needed to get better on defense in a lot of ways. But I think the number one focus was speed. They needed to get a lot faster, and I think they did. I think that's why you see them draft Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the 2nd round. Like, they're not going to say that they drafted him to match up better with Lamar Jackson, because we asked Andrew Berry, and he's just not going to flat out say it. But I think it's pretty obvious that when you draft that hybrid safety linebacker to get a lot faster on the second level of your defense, and frankly, he's a guy, Owusu-Koramoah, who a lot of coaches might not see as a fit in their scheme, and why he's in the second round. Partly why he's in the second round. Obviously, there was a medical condition that was flagged that the Browns had no issue with, and they were comfortable with, and picking him there at 52nd overall. But I think that just kind of is a perfect illustration of the attempt to get faster. They drafted him, and they drafted like a similar guy to him, Tony Fields, in the 5th round. I think that they really want that certain type of linebacker, and it's, in my mind, to compete with those dual threat quarterbacks you just mentioned. Lamar Jackson is, right there at the top of the list, just because the Browns have to face him twice a year.
Right.
And I think that they got faster in a lot of other areas. John Johnson III was a big-time free agent acquisition at safety. Greg Newsome II, first-round pick cornerback to pair with Denzel Ward. And Newsome really has some nice speed. Hasn't played it down, obviously, but you could feel it. You could feel the speed in mandatory minicamp of Newsome and Usa Koromoa. So I think that they did get faster, and that's exactly what the goal was because of those quarterbacks you mentioned.
I saw your story about them going down to House of Athlete. You had a lot of the Browns players who went down there. We've had Brandon Marshall on here on the podcast before, so we're familiar with that. But what did those guys take away from that time, and how did that all come together?
Well, I think that they took that as an opportunity to, just get on the same page and work out together. And obviously Baker Mayfield and the rest of the starting offense, minus left tackle Jedrick Wills and fullback Andy Janovich, they weren't out there at OTAs. This is kind of tied, in my mind, to, J.C. Tretter's movement that he spearheaded as president of the NFLPA. The Browns offensive players, that's their starting center. They're not going to go against him. So when he wants to put the voluntary back in voluntary OTAs and, hey, let's work out on our own, get our work done, and we don't need to be in there amid the pandemic. We don't need to be getting, as a center, he's saying, I don't need to be bull rushed in May and getting a helmet in my chest. The offense stayed away. The starting offense was there. So this was a chance for them to get together. They got together, the offensive guys, Baker and a lot of the skill guys got together in April at House of Athlete. And then they did it again right before mandatory minicamp. So in June, they went to Austin, Texas, in Baker's hometown. And, again, he had Jarvis Landry and the tight ends Austin Hooper and David Njoku and Kareem Hunt and Donovan Peoples-Jones, receiver, and another receiver in Rashard Higgins. At this time, added to the mix was Odell Beckham Jr. He wasn't there at the House of Athlete, doing his rehab on the ACL in April, wasn't ready. But then in June, joined them. And they got good work in, and then they went into mandatory minicamp the following week. So I just think it gave them an opportunity to get off Zoom for a little while because they were in all the Zooms with the coaches.
Mm-hmm.
That's around April 19th, those virtual meetings installing the offense. But it gave them a chance to get on the grass together, see each other, and work out. And I think that even though there's continuity on the offense, I think that's a big deal to get some timing and chemistry down just to see each other, the camaraderie aspect of it. And really the House of Athlete piece, that was really the doing of Jarvis Landry, because they could have gotten together at Baker's high school. Lake Travis in Austin has amazing facilities. Obviously Texas high school football is a big deal down there.
Yeah.
We could have got together there a couple times, but in fact, they did last year. They went there as well. But Jarvis started working out at House of Athlete all the time. I mean, he's there all the time this off season. A guy named Mo Wills, who I interviewed for that story, became his full-time trainer in February. So Jarvis was like, hey, bring everybody down here. And then they got going. And somehow that was able to be parlayed into the defensive line getting together this summer at House of Athlete. There's a connection there between the Browns, and there's word of mouth there. That's a good facility. And so Myles Garrett and Malik Jackson and Andrew Billings and some of the other defensive linemen were able to get down there and have their own little session. So the skill guys in Baker, they get a lot of the headlines when they do these workouts. They got all the videographers putting stuff up
Right.
on YouTube channels and Instagram videos. The D linemen were more low key, but they were still there getting stuff done too and building a little bit of camaraderie and chemistry.
Good deal. So you said it, you feel like they can make it to AFC Championship game. Do you feel like that's because they win their division? Is that the extent of your big prediction for the year, or what are you saying?
I don't know if they win the division just because I have so much respect for Baltimore. And I think that, I think the Browns can split with them this year. It's a really, really interesting part of the Browns schedule. They play the Ravens back to back, but the Browns have a bye week in between and the Ravens play the Steelers in between. So, you don't ever want to say in May or June or July that a game is a must win, but the way the schedule sets up, that second meeting between the Browns and Ravens, you could see it being a must-win for the Browns if they lose the first one in Baltimore, because they have the advantage of being at home, coming off the bye, and the Ravens have the Steelers. So, that's going to be huge, and the division very well could be decided by how those back-to-back games between Baltimore and Cleveland go. It's a quirky thing in the schedule.
Yeah,
it could come down to it. And I think that AFC Championship game appearance doesn't hinge on, winning the division, because this is one of the best divisions, if not the best division in football. You had 3 playoff teams last year from it, and you're going to have, at least 2 this year. We'll see what the Steelers are up to. Obviously, a lot of questions there. But, Ben Roethlisberger's there. I'm not going to count him out. So, I think you get in, right?
Right.
And in that tournament, and then you see where you can go from there. And I think the Browns are talented enough to be back in it. And I think them going farther in it than last year is realistic for all the reasons we talked about, Mike. And, you can say Super Bowl. A lot of people will pick them to go to the Super Bowl. I think that they are a sexy Super Bowl pick nationally and locally here in Northeast Ohio. I just think, they were right there. They were on the doorstep of the AFC Championship game last year. They lost a close one to the Chiefs. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes got hurt.
Right.
So that affected, the final score and how tight it was probably. But I think that they're there and they're an improved team. And they, as Travis Kelce said this summer, I was at the Jarvis Landry softball game. Kelce said he thinks that the Browns are neck and neck with the Chiefs. So I buy it. And I think they got a realistic shot. And if you get to that AFC title game, you're right there. Anything can happen.
Good deal. Well, Nate, I really appreciate your time and insight. Tell everybody where they can find you. Always produces great insight and info on the Browns. So where can everybody find all your work?
Well, the website's beaconjournal.com. And I'm on Twitter at by Nate Ulrich. My last name is Ulrich. And I always link to all that stuff and retweet my straight work too, and the stuff we're doing at the USA Today Network. So thanks for having me on, Mike. It's been really good. I listen to the pod all the time, read your stuff, and I was excited to join you.
Hey man, I really appreciate you having me and making some time there as you're trying to recharge, and good luck to you. And hopefully I'll see you on the road sometime real soon.
Sounds good. I think the Browns are going to be a team that you're going to want to swoop by and see at times.
Yep, exactly. Thanks. All right. Thanks so much to Nate for his insight. And, I agree with him. I feel like Nate, that Baker Mayfield's going to have a big year this year. I did a piece earlier this week on usatoday.com talking about 10 of the top prospects that people around the league envision as potential breakout players. And one of those was Baker Mayfield, because yes, obviously, he had a really good rookie season, struggled with consistency the year before last and part of last season before finishing strong. And a number of people I talked to said they feel like with that continuity, he can take his game to another level this year. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they do. Things are falling into place. I really like what Andrew Berry and company are doing there in Cleveland. And Kevin Stefanski, had a lot of challenges last year as a first-year head coach, but did not seem to be fazed by them, led the team to one of their most successful seasons, and we'll see if they can take it a step further. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can read me at usatoday.com. I had a piece in the last week about Baker Mayfield's contract status and what could play out there. And again, the piece on the top 10 potential breakout players to watch this year. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at by Mike Jones, same thing on Instagram. And do me a favor, take this podcast, share it with a friend, and I'll talk to you guys again next time.